Hello and welcome to the Happiness Is podcast with me, your host, Bruce Aitchison from Happiness Is Egg-Shaped. And yes, that's right. I'm excited. I'm excited again. We have a guest on today who was on the original list at the very, very beginning when we came up with this idea to do a podcast. And I made a list of the people I wanted to speak to. And I was really, really keen to speak to this man because I love the journey he's had, the different experiences he has had, the places he's been, the people he's met, the people he's influenced. Been in education, a bit like myself, but traveled the world in different cultures, bringing different things to different environments. But the thing he's always done is made places better when he's been there. He's picked them up in one place and he's taken them forward. And he's doing that right now in a place not really that well known for rugby, but I'm pretty confident he's going to make some very, very big progress with the team that he's working with just now. He's just come off the back of a very long, arduous journey to get home. So I'm absolutely delighted that he's given up some time to speak to me. Please welcome the one and the only Mr. Damian McGrath. Hello.
Hello, Bruce, and well, thank you for asking me. I remember sitting on a plane flying from Dubai to Seattle, filling in a questionnaire for you on when you first started the Happiness Is Egg-Shaped.
That's right. You were one of the very first interviews.
Yeah.
That took up 20 minutes of your journey time, I reckon, but it was brilliant. And I learned so much from that. And I've admired what you've been up to for such a long time. And you're so interactive on Twitter. And I love to see the things that you post and present and respond to. At the moment, you're with Germany. Now, nobody really would pick that as being a big rugby nation, but there's so much going on there, isn't there?
There is. I mean, it isn't a big rugby nation, and it's very much a niche sport. They hit the headlines a few years ago when the owner of Capri Sun, Dr. Bill, poured his millions in, and they imported a lot of overseas players who were German qualified in to play in the 15s, and it looked as though rugby was really going to take off. But as always seems, everywhere I've been in the world, politics always plays a part, and that all seem to disappear, and rugby's hit a low point, and it's just rebounding a little bit. It's a very small, very committed community. As always, when you go to a country, you manage to find a rugby club, and you find great people who love the game and are committed, and follow the results from all around the world, like everyone seems to do. So, yeah, it's a small rugby community, but my goodness, it's committed. That is for sure.
Did you do much background on it before looking at it? Did you investigate clubs and players and history?
No, I didn't. And the history is amazing. I don't know if you know that they were playing before the Second World War. They were on a par with France, and I think in the little rugby museum in Heidelberg, there's the original silver medal from the Olympic Games when rugby was first played in the Olympics. It has a really strong history and a long history, but I didn't know any of that when I finished in Canada, and I thought maybe it's time to go home. And I got a call from Manu Wilhelm, who's the CEO, head of performance, and he said, "Look, Sevens is the one thing that's strong here, and we're an almost team. We've almost made it to the World Series, and we're looking for that next step. It's only an hour from home." I'll never forget him saying that. You can get a flight from Frankfurt to Manchester. It's an hour. You can get home quite easily, not realizing that the pandemic was going to set in. But so it was the closeness to home and that one last challenge. I always, just when I thought it was enough, that last challenge. I love a challenge, so that's how I ended up there, and I don't regret it. It's been a fantastic experience.
And are you looking at it and you can see potential? Were there quick wins that you were able to make, as well as trying to put something in place that's going to last?
Yeah, I mean, I always try and sell a little dream, and make it, look as though it's achievable fairly easily. And we looked at what we could do to make things better, rather than what it was that they were doing wrong. And we got off on the right foot. We had a success in the World Challenger Series, in Chile, and we won that. And it looked like we were favourites for the qualifications for the World Series. And it wasn't difficult to get success because they had all the makings of it in already there. I just felt it just needed a few tweaks and twists and polishes, and like I said, just sell them a little dream that they could, that we all felt was achievable. So that was the way I approached it.
How do you sell a dream? Are you a storyteller?
Oh yeah, I bore the pants off everybody. I have a story for every occasion. Every player I've ever coached will tell you that. And the other coaches as well, because I always, when you get old, you've always been there and done something similar. So, but I think to be a coach and to be a successful coach, you have to be a salesman. You have to sell your way of doing things. And if people think it's something that's worth investing in, they see value in it. They will invest. They'll invest their time and their efforts. So you have to think of how, just going in and saying, look, you can't pass, you can't catch, your defence is rubbish, and I'm not really happy about your set piece. Doesn't really, they'll all just roll their eyes, and they've all heard that, we can do, as you said, we can do this, we can do that. But I like to tell them a few, steps on how it can be done, and what their strengths are and how their strengths can take them forward. Because one of the easiest things in sport or in life is to point out what people do wrong. I do it every Saturday watching the football on the telly. You always think you know better, but I always feel that people's strengths are their key, to take them forward. And if you seem to value what they can do right from the beginning, people get on board much quicker.
And the environments you've been in, the cultures you've been in are very different. You went from, at the time, and I know that you probably maybe laugh at this, but England Sevens had resource, had facility, was backed, I suppose. But then Samoa is a whole other environment and culture. You go to Canada, you're now in Germany. You can't be the same Damian in all of those places, can you?
No, you can, but you have to think about your approach. I mean, I can take it back even further than that. Where when I first left rugby league and came over to rugby union, it seems ridiculous now because the games are very close together and there's no animosity. But they were only 4 years into professionalism when I first left rugby league and went over to join the England performance department. And it was very much an amateur approach, and I came from a professional background in rugby league, and you had to be careful. You didn't go in and compare the two sports because the ball was the only thing that was the same. Everything else was different. Their mindset, their approach, it was difficult, and also, and I mean this in the nicest possible way. Virtually everybody was from a private school, and I was. Whilst I was a teacher and educated to a degree, I suppose, it was a working class sport, rugby league, and the players in rugby league had a different mindset. It was very much coach led, whereas as soon as I got into rugby union, they questioned you far more. People didn't accept what you said, and so I had to change my approach there, and it was good in a very positive way. Think about what you were saying and why you were saying it, and justify what you do. And also take on board that two-way interaction far more than maybe rugby league did. So that was my first cultural shift, and it taught me some good lessons about listening more as well. And I've always been good at getting on with people. I like to think I'm a people person, and the hardest place. And then I went to Spain, which after one of my many sackings in my 100-year career, I ended up doing a couple of years with in Spain when they had an influx of money around the 2006 mark, and they decided to invest in the team with a view to qualifying for the World Cup. And they went from 32nd in the world to 19th, and we had a great time for 2 years. But there was only 2 players in the team that actually spoke English, and I went to skills and defence, and it was a great lesson because you say things and you expect people to pick up on the nuances of what you say and what you were inferring by what you were saying. But I had a guy who was just translating verbatim, and people were doing. I mean, it was just at the time. When you say something and you look to your left and everybody's gone off to the right to do something different because they've taken it the wrong way, and so that was a terrific lesson as well. And think very carefully about what you're going to say and what it is you mean by what you say, because as you're finding out now, once I start talking, I can't stop. And I had to think about being more concise and to the point. Obviously, I couldn't tell any stories because that was whenever I tell a story, I'm the only one that laughs anyway. So that particular bit would never have changed, but that taught me a great lesson. But the hardest place I've ever been, the hardest place I've found culturally was Wales, which seems bizarre when it's only 2.5 hours from here by car, from Leeds, where I am now. North Wales, I became head of rugby in North Wales. They were looking to make it into North Wales is a huge area. Well, it's almost a third of the country, and they wanted to make it into the next region, RGC, Rugby Gogledd Cymru. So we had to start from scratch to get a team together from all the little village clubs dotted around North Wales. And I don't know if you realise, but North Wales is predominantly a Welsh-speaking area as well. So most of the boys only spoke Welsh as a first language and English was their second language. So as soon as you used to go out to the local village club, it was Chris Horseman was the other coach working with me, who played for Wales and for Worcester. And we used to say we have to go out into bandit country because it literally was like that. You got out there and you just didn't see anybody for ages, and then you suddenly come on this little village and they'd look at you as though you were somebody with two heads. And trying to sell a Welsh dream as an Englishman in a Welsh-speaking area was probably the toughest gig you could ever possibly do. I mean, I think they'd probably hate the English more than they hate COVID-19 if it had been around the time. That animosity that the Welsh of all people, even more I think than the Scots, have with the English. And I had to, try and sell me and sell this vision we had for North Wales and get them to invest in this regional team. And could we have your two best players? That was a really tough thing because you have to see it from their point of view, and you can't demand. You've got to try and get people on side. I know I'm telling everybody what they probably know, but God, that was a tough one. We used to go out every Wednesday. Rupert Moon, the great Rupert Moon, who he was the general manager, and often it was the three of us. We'd jump in the car and we'd go to Brofestiniog or Bethwelly or Nant Conway. You'd be out there and go into the clubhouse, and they'd all sit, not a smile on their faces, looking at you. I'd stand up, and they'd with the English accent straight away. And it was it was a great 2 years I had there, but that was a really, really tough thing. Even more so, I think, than flying the other side of the world. And then, of course, went to, as you said, I went back to England to assist Simon Amor. It was his first coaching job. I did a year with Simon, and then went on to Samoa, which it's a 10 beer story. Samoa. I wouldn't know where to start. It was just there are so many things that happened, and some outlandish things, but it was a great place. I mean, what an amazing! I don't know if you've ever been to the South Pacific. As a little boy, I used to watch. You think Tahiti and those places were like the most unbelievable places. You think you'd never get there. And Samoa's it's that palm trees and coconuts and blue seas all the way around. And if you're going on holiday, it's amazing. My wife had the best time of her life. She said it's the best place we've ever been. But man, rugby that was something else. I was the first ever overseas coach. I was the first non-Samoan ever to coach there. And they call white people palangis. And I could hear the word palangi everywhere. Every time I turned my back, it's one of those places where they needed, at that time in their rugby, they needed an overseas coach, but they didn't want one, if you understand what I mean. They knew they needed that outside influence to come in and try and change things around, but they didn't really want anybody coming in and being, they wanted their own people in. And very much it's been like that in other parts of the world. I understand that. It'd be the same, I suppose, in most countries. You know,
in Scotland.
You don't want outsiders coming. You want your own people, and I understand that. But and Samoa was just, you know, it's you know, there are churches everywhere. You can drive around the one main island, Apollo, in about 4.5 hours. It's tiny, and there's a church every 200 yards. You know, Catholic, Mormon, you name it. There's a church, and they're still very poor, live in villages. Most people sleep on the floor, and yet there's this big, spectacular church in the middle of it all. God knows that. You know, well, I know where the money comes from for it, from the poor people. But so church, family is very important, and rugby is just about as important as religion. I think 200,000 people live there, and of those 200,000, 199,999 are expert coaches. Let me tell you, everybody had an opinion.
But you must have loved it because you brought them success.
Oh, I had a great time, and I bet everybody's the same. When I got the job, I thought, this is like Christmas. You know, you brought up on the story of Great Pacific Islander in rugby league and rugby union. You know, I thought I can't wait to get there. The players are fantastic. I can do something here. What you don't count on is the interference from outside. The Prime Minister was the chairman of the board. Every morning with his security detail, he'd come and sit on a bike in the gym. Big, huge, fat guy he was. He'd come and sit on the bike in the corner and just cast his eye over, and then send one of his minions over to tell the manager, who he felt was training well and should be in the team. It was like that. But it was a terrific experience. That they had a high performance unit, which it looked like, you know, the fairground after the fairs left town. It was just like a disaster zone, and we had a few ripped up bags and no water. The showers didn't work, and I think the Chinese had built this facility some years previously, and it was crumbling. But the boys were fantastic. A lorry used to go around the island start at 4 a.m. in the morning and pick them up from different places, you know, and they come in singing, and so that part of it was terrific. And
what did you get from that then, without maybe the science or the support team or where did that take you to as a coach?
But you know, it underlined something which I'd always felt was true, even from being a teacher, that connections are important. Samoan culture is where if you're old, you have automatic respect, and young people are very much seen but not heard. You know, their opinions are encouraged. Older people eat first. All sorts of, you know, very old traditions that they very much stick to. So you know the drill. You've got the players round and you're speaking, and most can understand English. A lot of them can't. So I've got someone just again translating. But I've learnt the lesson. I'm not saying too much. And you ask a question and you look. You know, you want in some interaction, and everybody's eyes are on the floor, because that's their culture. That's their tradition. You know, they're not there to give opinions. They're there to be told. And that's how the other coaches have been with them. And the success all came from when I managed to get them to look me in the face, and when they could trust me enough to speak, and it wasn't going to be an issue for them, because it would never happen, you know, with Samoans in the past. There were crazy things that were against Samoan culture. Like even when we were away on tour, if there were no meeting rooms available, because Sevens is such a small squad, you could meet in someone's bedroom and, you know, plug the laptop into the back of a TV. It's against Samoan culture for young people to sit on an older person's bed. So, you know, if we met in the coach's room because it was bigger, you know, there's just, you know, a hotel room, there's only a bed in there, isn't there? So I just encourage them all to sit on the bed. Well, I mean, that was one of the things they used against me when they wanted to sack me, you know, that I didn't, you know, I was just abusing culture. But look, there were all sorts of cultural differences which I had to be aware of and get round, because as soon as you connect with people, you can then, they can see that you value them. And if you value them, you want to know what they're feeling and how they feel. And, you know, I spent a lot of time on that part of things, because they could all play rugby, and getting them into its shape of a team was much easier once we were all on the same page and all happy and feeling confident and comfortable. I suppose very much like you would with any team, but it was harder there to get over that barrier. It was difficult to start with.
And I always love speaking to Sevens coaches and Sevens players because the environment is so different from the professional 15s. There's fewer people, obviously, which means the connections are potentially easier to make. You spend time in airports and hotels, and it's a road show. You go from here to there. But in rugby league, it was autonomous. The coach told you what to do. You did it. You did it really hard. You then learned a little bit when you moved, and then you go on the Sevens circuit. It sounds to me like that's the dream job for you. You're able to make connections. You're able to bond with people, share the experiences, and then help them to become better rugby players. Yes, but that thing we all love to say, we're making them better people too. Yeah, your experience had led to that, hadn't it?
It had, yeah. I mean, the Sevens lends itself to an intimacy that 15s doesn't. That's for sure. And you can make those connections much easier, as you say, because you spend a lot more time together. It's only part of the journey, though. You've still got to know your onions on the rugby side, and people. I love it when you go on Sky Sports and you switch on, and whoever's, when Leicester won the Premiership at football a few years ago, beating all the big guns. They spent hours talking about the culture there, as though they were doing something. They were sprinkling dust on their food to make them different. That everybody does more or less the same things, and the best coaches manage to make it inclusive, but players will buy into you and your way of doing things if they see, as I said at the start, they see value in it, and they can see success. Because you don't want to train hard and say, "Coach is a great bloke. We had such a great time, but we won diddly squat." You've still got to. You can be still authoritative as long as you set the boundaries out and everybody understands what you're doing. That word "authentic" often comes up in modern coaching parlance, doesn't it? What's one of the things you need to be a coach? You have to be authentic. Well, authentic, I just means they can trust your word. If you say this, it's going to happen. And if you tell them why they're not in the team, they take it. Even if they don't agree, they understand that you have, reasons for doing it. It's not on a whim or because your wife told you to do it this morning. It's the whole package. But that connect. If you connect with people, and I think same as a teacher and whatever walk of life, you connect with people. They'll come along with you. I can remember still at school the names of my teachers from all those years ago who made me feel the same way. I loved being in their class because they connected and how they made me feel, and they valued what I did, but they also told great stories and they made things come alive, but they knew their subjects. And they could have a big stick if they needed to. And I tried to, back in those days, it was literal, wasn't it? But, I tried to take that in when I became a teacher. I always wanted the best for everybody. And, I would always value everybody's thing. And I do it even now in Germany. I still do the same thing every morning at training. I speak to everybody individually in a positive way somehow before we start training. Even if it's in the stretch and the warm-up, I'll go around and always mention everybody's name because people like to feel included. And I just think it's so important. If you're in a people industry, then you've got to make people the most important thing. And that's just how I've always been. And
when you did your interview for me a long time ago, and I asked you who your role models were, and you were pretty clear on how important family have been. Yeah. There's no way you could have predicted the places you've been and the things you've done when you were heading to Batley to play rugby league. You must look back with a mixture of pride and amazement.
Well, do you know, I often read on social media, which I know you should, because social media can be a rabbit hole sometimes, about people complaining that job opportunities in the professional game aren't there. It depends what you're prepared to do for them. I mean, I had a great job as head of PE. Rugby league was professional, but only that you got paid for it. Everybody was part-time, really. PE teacher by day, rugby player by night, as it was then. And to leave my teaching job to take a gamble to go full time as a coach was a huge thing. If you think about it, I had a young family, and the pension, everything was there. I could have stayed in doing what I was doing and helped out the local club, but I had this desire to be a coach, and sometimes, if the chance comes, you have to make a choice of whether you want to do it, and there's always a sacrifice to make. And stepping out of that comfort zone was difficult, and I didn't know, there was no safety net. I didn't know where it was going to take me, what it was going to do, and I just made the choice then. And family, you need your family to be behind you, or that can never happen. That they will support you through thick and thin, and there's been a lot of thin, and it was daunting, but I loved every second of it. Even looking back now, even the bad times, I've loved every moment. You're talking about traveling the world. Do you know how I got into Rugby Union was to do with travel, and not in the way you might think. I was at London Broncos when Richard Branson had bought I left Leeds Rhinos, and they brought all these overseas stars in. The captain of New Zealand Rugby League, captain of Australia. We got all these overseas stars in, and Richard Branson was really hands-on with the club, and I came down as assistant coach to do skills and defence, as I always seemed to do at that time. And I had a great year there, but bizarrely, now from where I am now, I was homesick. I was staying with my sister in London and her family, but 3 hours drive from and I thought, I can't do this. I'm missing home. I've got to go back to the north of England. And Joe Lydon, he was the famous rugby league legend who'd gone over to work with Clyde Woodward. This was 2001. And Joe was a great friend. He'd been performance director of the Rugby League. And I was talking to him, and he said, Ellery Hanley has been helping Clive and he's leaving. Clive's looking for a replacement. Do you fancy it? So I spoke to Joe and Clive, and they said, look, you can be based at home. You can work out of Leeds, just come into camps, travel to games. I thought, absolutely, and it was exciting. I thought, what a great challenge as well to go into, what looked like a different sport. And I love being challenged. And as you all do when you're a young coach, you think you know it all as well. I thought, I can take everything I know and make a difference. It'd be awesome. And I can live at home. But I haven't seen home for the last 20 years now. I just seem to have been constantly on the road. Little did I know that, I'd never really get my bum on the settee here for hardly any time. So that was how I ended up. I was sold on a dream of never having to leave Leeds apart from going to game.
Get out of that there, London. Yeah. I'm a PE teacher, been a head of PE, but I can't imagine what it must have been like as the naughty little boy getting sent to see the head of PE when you were head of PE. You must have played that role nicely, did you? Yeah,
I thought, yeah. Like we all do, you think shouting's going to make a difference. I quickly learned that. I was in it for my sins, a bit like I'd always loved to. It's never going to happen now, but I'd love to have coached one of the top teams. I'd like blue chip players to play, but rather than always having to. And I don't mean that in any way disrespectful to the boys I've coached, who I've loved. And I always wanted to coach in a school in a nice area, but I always ended up in inner city schools. So, I ran the rugby league teams, and most of the naughty boys has always played in those teams. So I managed to keep everybody in check, and I tried to make lessons fun, I suppose, like everybody does. But one of my best ever coaching stories was when that first year. When you have, it was the under-9s, and they were brand new to rugby, and you're trying to explain before the first game rugby league is a much easier game to explain, in terms of positions and things. And the little boy who was fullback said, what is fullback, sir? And I said, football? Yeah. I said, it's like the goalkeeper. I said, the last line of defence. Right, got you. He said, I've got you. Brilliant. So I'll never forget. And back it was on a huge field, one of those full-size adult fields, under-9s. And the big kid on one team runs across, and like a swarm, they all follow him. And it was just, it never got past either side of the halfway much. And then late in the second half, the big kid on their team suddenly went right down the middle. And, you focused on the ball. And I looked around, where's the fullback? And nobody could see him. And he stood underneath the post like the goalkeeper. And he is literally stood like this. He's been, he's been stood like that all game. He stood like this, waiting. This kid's running through. I only found out afterwards that the teacher and the other school had been explaining the same thing. If you break through, you probably have the fullback to be. He's like the last line of defence. So this kid had taken it literally. Could have scored anywhere. He just said, right, I've got to beat the fullback. He could have put it down. He runs straight at the little kid stood with the post who nails him and he drops the ball. And so again, you talk about remember, be careful what you say. That was a lesson I got there.
Yeah.
You make an analogy, be careful because the children take it verbatim. Oh, it was just, it sticks with me forever, that one.
I can remember having a student teacher who had a hard time because he couldn't work out what this kid was doing, but the teacher had told him to go and look for space. And the kid was a mile away trying to find space. And yeah, you're right. And working with people with English as a second language must be a challenge if you start using metaphors and things and telling stories. That you then go from Samoa, that you can drive around the island in 4.5 hours, to Canada, that you're still looking at the same stretch of water for 4.5 hours. You're not even round the lake yet. Yeah. Canada intrigues me for rugby, and it's had its issues, but it's a big bloody place, and there's a lot of athletes there. How did you find that experience? Because it must have been so different from everything you'd had before.
Well, it was, because they've got all the ingredients to be successful at rugby. It's one of those frustrating places because I had my issues with Rugby Canada, which ultimately led to my removal. But the game's based in Toronto, around that Ontario area, which is under snow for most of the year, so only has a limited time, a couple of months, 3 months, I think, for the season. And then the next big area is, 6 hour, 7 hour flight away in Vancouver, British Columbia, where we were based on Victoria Island, where there's the BC Premier League that plays, the climate's similar to here in the UK, and they play that same sort of time frame. So finding the players wasn't as straightforward as, because I always like to travel and see people and let them know there's getting back to that connections. But finding people or going to see people in Ontario on weekends off was hard going, because it was more than going on holiday. And on the summer here it was a long way. So the travel issues hit me straight away. But they'd had not great success, and in fact I don't think they only just avoided relegation. And I arrived, and I remember meeting the team for the first time. I'd flown into a camp because my visa wasn't quite ready, so we met in a camp in the US before flying back. And I'd got there first, and they came off the plane, and that hangdog look. They were all, and I found out after they decided, well, we'll give him a couple of weeks, this bloke, and if it looks like he's as bad as that fella, then we'll call it a day. And I had to go through a lot of the same thing that I did in Samoa, in that you have to build that trust and get people with you straight away, and at least they could understand my stories. But I got the same type of response from blank faces. But once we got together, it was all right. But there's so many great athletes, and I hate the word athlete being used in rugby, because it just speaks of athletic prowess and not really about rugby talent. But they did have athletes. Some really, really big, strong, fast men. And there was this football, the Canadian football, which is like a gridiron type of game, which is big, as big as ice hockey there. And there were so many. You're looking around and think, I could just need to get hold of a few of these crossover athletes, and we could hit the big time. But there wasn't a great will from Rugby Canada to make that happen, which I was disappointed in. But you're right. There's more to rugby in Canada than's probably been shown, and I hope they get their act together and get it sorted out, because again, there's some fabulous people there who who just want the best for the game and want to grow it. So it was I loved my time in Canada, and I was so disappointed to leave.
It strikes me as being a bit like Germany, but just with supersized geography. There's a small band of very committed, Nate Hirayama. What a servant he's been to Canadian Sevens, and instantly recognizable to everyone because he's been around for such a long time, and what a player. But there must be more of those guys around, but trying to find them is a challenge.
Well, and it's not so much find them as giving them the opportunities to play at the next level, and that's what I'm finding in Germany. It's not that we don't have lots of players, but just because they're from Germany doesn't mean they don't have some talent, and it's finding a way to give them opportunities to develop that talent, and that's our big challenge in Germany. The bulk of the senior team in the Sevens are late 20s, 30 now. They're not going to be here, much over the next couple of years. So we have to bring that next band through, but we have to give them opportunities to play. And the level of rugby in Germany is poor, to say the least. The Bundesliga is it's not great, and the level of rugby in Canada in the domestic leagues wasn't fantastic. But what they had, the MLR has been and will be, I think, a great boost for that, because that gives some of those Canadian players an opportunity. But for all the smaller teams, that's why Sevens is important, because it puts them on a big stage. And if overseas clubs see them, particularly for Samoa, it's why Sevens in Samoa is so important, because it's a way of feeding their 15s team. If they can get their best Sevens players picked up by clubs overseas into the 15s, then they come back into the senior 15s team, and that should be the challenge. Should be the way forward, I think, for Sevens as a game to let people see some great talented players who might not get through the conventional 15s pathway, an opportunity to show what they can do. And let's face it, huge TV audiences, big crowds in a stadium, their skills under pressure. If you can crack it there, then you should be a really marketable product for some team somewhere.
Does your paternal instinct kick in with some of these boys when things like that do happen? In amongst that crowd will be agents and scouts from the big professional teams. Did you provide a lot of advice and support to players to make those decisions?
I did if they asked. I would never go chasing them, but I mean, I treat them all like my children anyway, and I stay in touch with all of them. Even those kids back at that school I talked to you about now, they're in the 40s now, and they're calling me sir still, But I want the best for people, and Adam Zaruba, who played in the Canadian Sevens, went to the Philadelphia Eagles. It was his dream to play in the NFL, or to have a chance to go. And for North American kids, that's the be all and end all. And he was unsure. He thought he might be making a mistake because he wasn't sure just how good he was. But he desperately wanted to try it. And sometimes, it would weaken our team if he left. But I knew how important it was to him. And I had to encourage him to go and say, look, we'll always be here for you, and stay in touch. And, and he went and had a shot, and, enjoyed every second, and sort of scratched that itch, and then it didn't quite make it, and we brought him back. So you've got to look at it from every point of view. We even up to now, we just recently we took a German development team over to play in the Rugby Town Sevens in Colorado, which is a big American Sevens tournament where all the best players there. And we took a young English guy who's German qualified with us, who'd been training with us. I won't mention his name, and he did really well for us. He was terrific. And but because it wasn't an official event, he wasn't captured for Germany. But he did enough, and I picked him for this recent World Series events in Canada. And he rang me the day after we got back to say, I've been approached by GB. They're struggling for a team, and they want me to go. And you knew, I knew in my heart of hearts they were just, probably just using him because they, some of the bigger names were resting or wouldn't be there. And it just sounded as though they were using him as a filler. But I knew as a young English guy, you know, the pull of being picked for GB would be fantastic. Whereas, you know, I had the feeling that staying with Germany would probably be his best long-term future. I hope I'm proved wrong, but the turmoil in his, you know, in that young lad's mind was, you could hear it in his voice. And you know, I encouraged him to do it. I said, look, if that's what you want to do, you've got to go do it. And even, I think that's part of it is making sure it's there. It's what you feel they need and want, as opposed to what you need and want. Because it would have been easy for me to, you know, to chop his legs off and try and, you know, make it difficult for him. But it's been that, and I'm sure you know, as a teacher, you want the best for them, but you've got to understand, of course, that, you know, they see things in a different way, don't they? And
it sounds to me like you've been able to park your ego. Is that something that's come with age and experience?
Well, as hard as it is to, I haven't really got one. I've always been, if the team can be successful, I always feel it reflects well on everybody. I had this fabulous coach when I was assistant at Leeds Rhinos called Graham Murray, who gave me a great lesson in that. We played live on Sky one Friday evening against London Broncos as it happened. And with about 10 minutes to go, we were losing when we were top of the league and going to qualify for the grand final. And we made a substitution and a tactical change, and the game was won in the last minutes. And they interviewed Graham live on the pitch, Eddie Hemmings and Nick Stevens, Steve-O. And I said, Graham, you know, another tactical master stroke from you. There, you know, he said that wasn't me. He said that was my assistant, Damian McGrath. That was his choice. He said I was struggling, and he came up with, you know, that change. And they said, oh, fantastic. Which, man, it never happened to me before, where somebody would say that. He could have easily just said, yeah, it was something we talked about, but he didn't. He gave me all the kudos for it. And it didn't diminish his position one little bit. In fact, you know, all the staff and all the players saw and heard it, and it just sort of grew his reputation even more as a caring leader, you know, who put everybody first. And it was just you know, that again, you know, those little lessons that stick with you, and that was it boosted me. You know, it gave me a profile that I didn't up to that point have, but it also, you know, taught me that lesson of, you know, it doesn't matter who gets the credit as long as the team win, you know, and then usually everybody gets the reflected glory anyway. So
you've spoken a lot about players and kids that you've taught, and, you know, playing that role of being kind of their dad as well. But you've had a lot of experience of managing up the way, or having to deal maybe with what's above. Do you think, did you ever appreciate that when you started coaching, that was part of the gig?
No, I didn't. And it held me back for a long time because I didn't want to get involved in any of that. But you can't disassociate yourself from it. It's unfortunately part of the role. It's amazing how many people above you think they know more than you anyway, and want to interfere. But politics are the same the whole world round. Everywhere I've been, there is politics, and you can't get away from, you know, the manoeuvrings of you know, in sport. It's an unfortunate part of the job, but you have to do it. And I'm not as abrasive with people interfering now as I used to be. You know, I just try and explain and then go do my own thing anyway. But and that's part of I mean, that's part of your being a coach and getting the players to trust you, is that the players know you have their back, or will represent them in the best possible way with the people in the front office, because, you know, they're always trying to save money, and they always want to chop people's contracts and do other things. But you've got to, the players want to know you've got their back, and I've always done that, often to my detriment, which is why I seem to be always getting hoofed out of somewhere. It's always because I've stood up against something that I think is wrong, or, you know, I didn't agree with, which is what happened in Canada for definite. But it's just one of those things, unfortunately.
Did you have, or have you got players? Did you have players that you you could see they could become coaches in future? Could you see things in them that you thought, you've got it?
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Hirayama. I was so lucky in Canada. There were three. The three legs of the rugby stool were Nathan Hirayama, John Moonlight, and Harry Jones. And John and Harry were real war horses, and Nathan was more the silk purse. But they were great leaders, respected by the players, as much for what they did for the players as for their playing prowess. They would lead the group against injustice as well as other things. But they also was happy to run things and talk about how we do things and what should we do and why I was doing things, and take their feedback on board, because they thought deeply about the game. Any of those three could have been or could be great coaches for sure. And I don't know. I would never have thought I'd have been a coach, because I was so insecure and lacked confidence, and speaking in front of people I couldn't think of anything worse. It'd be like a death by 1,000 cuts. So God knows why I became a teacher then. But I think some people shock you sometimes. It's the people you least expect seem to come through. But those three guys in Canada, definitely.
So going back to that, then becoming a teacher, it's certainly not for everyone. And you don't do it for the money, do you? So you go into that. Did it just make sense? You loved playing rugby league. I've heard you say before that you were a jack of all trades, master of none. PE teaching gave you the chance to be involved in sport, because at the time there weren't too many professional coaching opportunities.
Yeah, and I think also the biggest influences on my life were my PE teachers, probably. As I'm sure for many. I loved what they did and their selflessness, and the time they spent outside of hours, as you said, certainly not for the money, and rarely for any praise, because people just take them for granted. And it just seemed a great way to stay involved in sport and on a daily basis. And I never thought it'd lead to what it did, but it certainly did.
Did the kids like that you were playing rugby league? Did they ask you about it on the Monday morning? Did they give you a bit of stick? Did they?
Yeah, they followed it. Because Radio Leeds used to cover it live on Sunday afternoons, and they'd always get the. I mean, we hardly ever won a game, so it was always stick. But it was a good connect. Again, that was a connection between them, and they enjoyed that Sir was a player.
So what would make you go back into school? Could you see yourself? Oh, I'll take a couple of years and go back and be a teacher.
Never. I actually did a day's supply in. I'm trying to remember the year, 2008 maybe. In between one of my many sackings, my wife said, "You can't sit here all day waiting for the phone to ring. Why don't you sign up for a supply agency?" They sent me to a secondary school somewhere in Halifax. I thought I'd gone into Bedlam. It was just chaos. And in the staff room, I thought, I don't know how these people do this day in, day out. I couldn't wait to get out of there. The kids weren't interested, and the discipline side just seemed to have disappeared completely. So I cut that straight out. I take my hat off to everybody who teaches, because it's certainly changing. Of course, it has since the 30 years since I left, but it's not a job for everybody, as you said, and it's special people are teachers, very special people. And again, I just don't think they get the praise and as I try to value players, I hope that headmasters and they value the people they have, because I know how much work they do and how selfless they are. Apart from you, obviously.
Exactly. I was going to say, I was about to say amen to that, and then you had to go. Yeah. When you're on the Sevens circuit, you spend a lot of time with your own players, but you must also have enjoyed sharing a coffee with players from other countries, coaches. How did you enjoy that aspect of it?
Well, that's one of the pleasures of it. When you go on a training course or a coaching course, the best parts of it are often the coffee breaks or the nights out, in the bar when you sit and chew the fat, and you can talk about the things that are common to all of you, and that's the best thing about the Sevens circuit. The coaches who are prepared to sit, and there have been some great ones. Andy Friend, who's at Connacht now, was a great guy for getting everybody together and just talk about the things that connect you all, and it's amazing how many people have the same issues, and some people are guarded to begin with, but then you can get into it. And Sir Gordon Titchens, who obviously the great legend who was with New Zealand for so long, replaced me in Samoa, and even when I was with Samoa before that in England, getting him to talk to you was almost impossible. He'd done 3 months in Samoa, and he wanted to have a coffee with me every day to talk about what was going on and how life was, and share the same sort of issues that I had with him, because obviously I was one of the few people who understood what he was going through. So that was good, because Gordon's a great guy as well.
And looking ahead to what you're in just now, how do you get that German squad and support staff and the other coaches around? How do you get them to experience those things? Are you sending them out to invitational tournaments? Are you trying to make connections to give them those experiences?
Yeah, well, we are now that the restrictions are starting to lift. Obviously, that the 2 years I've been in Germany, which seems to have flown by, 18 months of it have been under the pandemic. So they've had to rely on my stories and my version of things, and I've done a lot of work with the players and with coaches. Just I suppose mentoring would be a way of describing it, but trying to pass on my experiences and my view on things, but also stressing that you can't. There isn't one way that fits all, and you've got to find out what ingredients are available to you, and if you've got mince and tomatoes and spaghetti, then spaghetti bolognese is the dish for you, but you can't turn it into filet mignon. And a lot of coaches I've found come with an idea of how they want their team to play, but they haven't got the ingredients to make it happen. So find a way. And I think if I've had success relative to where the teams have been when I arrived, it's because I found a way that suits the players we had, and I think that's always important. And I've tried to pass that on to everybody I've worked with. It. If you could write down how to be a coach in a book, there'd only be one book and everybody'd do it. There's millions of books where everybody's got an opinion, but in the end, it's working out what's best for you. Taking the things you like, leaving the things you don't like, and making sure that they work. I like to think that we've talked about connections with people and things, but I also like to think that I understand the game, and I'm always looking at challenging my views on the game and how I play the game, and those things are important. Yeah, for sure.
One of the things I like to speak to people about, and I've been lucky to speak to so many people through doing this podcast. Yeah. Looking back on my time in sport, I can remember 4 or 5 results, or there's objective things I can remember, but it's connections, it's feelings, it's experiences, it's memories that are the stories I can tell. When you look back, you've had some real high moments with the teams you've been with. You've won things that they've never won before in places that are far from home. How do you enjoy those, and how do you savor it without it becoming the be all and end all?
Because I always remember the bad times. Another one of the words that comes up in it, resilience, mental fortitude, whatever you want to call it. I always have a personal highlight reel in me. When things aren't going well, or when I've been out of work, you've got to remember the things that got you where you are, or why you do what you do. And I always have a sort of a mental show reel that I'll think about the things I've done, and those great wins, and the great players I've been lucky enough to meet. But at the same time, even last weekend, Germany finished 5th on the World Series, albeit a restricted version of it. But that that's history for them. They've got nothing near that in their time. And I remember standing on the field afterwards, after we scored a try in overtime to win it against the USA, one of the big guns. And I just took a second just to savor that moment, because often we don't. We get caught up in emotion and then move on to something else. But I looked around and I looked at the players and how happy everybody was and the staff, and I savoured every single second of that. And I thought, if things get tough later, I'll just remember that moment. And then we started talking about what's coming next for us, and what can we do to move the team forward, because you can always rest on your laurels and then get tipped up. So, is there a moment where that didn't happen? So I listened to Johnny Wilkinson, who said he would give anything, not for the final whistle in the World Cup final, but for the last, I think he said 30 seconds, because they knew what to do. It felt confident. It was almost that flow state. He would give anything to be in that moment again. Now, he didn't say that he missed it or he didn't appreciate the time, but is there anything you look back on and think, I wish I'd just stopped and done what you've just done with Germany and sort of savoured it? I think as a younger coach or player, I missed all that out, and I wish I'd have done that more often. And it was only as I got older, you start to appreciate what you've got. And I'm thankful for everything I do. The pandemic's been hard for me because I've been in Germany and my wife and family have been here in England, and travel's been impossible. I've been there for months at a time, feeling sorry for myself. But I'd go stand outside and make myself do it and look around. I'm in Heidelberg, one of the it's the second oldest university in the world, the home of printing, this beautiful medieval town with a castle. I'd have never thought when I was in Bradford all those years ago that I'd ever be stood here like this. And never mind that I'm living here and I can walk to the cafe or bar at the end of the street. It's something I think you need to do all the time. Just savor it, because I think life just moves on so fast, and especially for us, we're involved in sport. I know I follow you, and I know all the things that you're involved in, and match days and things. But how often do we just have a look around and think, I can't believe I'm here, and I can't believe I'm doing this, and I can't believe who I've just talked to, or who I've met. I had 2 years at Leicester Tigers and that team virtually won the World Cup for England. Martin Johnson, all those guys, and that's when I took that for granted a little bit too much. And whenever I meet those guys again, I just think, look who I'm talking to. Look who's just said hello to me without me having to go up with and ask for an autograph. They've said hello, Damian, to me before I've spoken to them. You can't buy that. That's just that. Those are the great, as you said, memories and the things. If you savour it, the memories will stay. And is that wasted on youth? Are we only learning that because we're getting a bit longer in the tooth? I think you do. I mean, and you can't say it, can you? You tell people, but they have to live it to understand it. I know that's a fact, isn't it? I'm trying to tell my kids that now, and they're in their 20s, and it's the same as my mum and dad saying it to me. You have to trip yourself up to realise it. And I think that's one of the reasons why there aren't any, or the very few, if there are, brilliant young coaches. It's an older person's game, because experience counts for so much as a coach, as opposed to a player. I think when you can be precocious young teenager and just get by on your talent, and you begin to understand the game more then as you get older. Whereas as a coach, I don't know if you found the same. You go in with ideas and you think you know what you're doing, and then suddenly you're sat on your backside because it's all gone wrong, and you don't have a mechanism to deal with it because you've got no experience in it. And one of the, if there is an upside to being older, it's that you've got plenty of lived experiences, and if you're smart enough, you'll learn a lesson from them and be ready for it next time. I love it. I absolutely love it. I've loved speaking to you, Damian, so much, and your stories have kept me going. I absolutely love it. So we finished this up because I've taken up a lot of your time, and it took you a long time to get home. So I don't want to keep you away from that couch that you're desperate to sit on. Yeah. So at the end of this, I asked people to finish the sentence, and I'm intrigued as to what this is going to be. So for you, Damian, happiness is having a night on my own settee in my own house. It really is. And you must be more of a Coronation Street than an EastEnders kind of guy. No, I'm not. I'm not a soaps man. No, I'm more highbrow politics and.
I love it. And the future for you?
Well, Germany for the foreseeable future. I hope we can qualify for the World Series, and the big hope is to try and get into the Paris Olympics. That would be an amazing thing. But yeah, I hope I can just leave them in a better position than I found them.
Well, I think evidence would suggest that that's what's going to happen. Damian, thank you so much. I've absolutely loved speaking to you, and I'm hoping one day we get to meet in the flesh, and I'll be asking for your autograph.
I'll bring a printed card. Yeah. Just last thing, talking about that, it was when I went to Samoa. It's as close to being in a boy band than I've ever been. I said there's only 200,000 people. I was the only guy on the island with white hair, and they knew I was the coach, which made me second only to God, I think, in terms of I had more selfies. I couldn't go shopping. Everywhere I went, it was coach, can I have a selfie? Will you sign this? And for 3 weeks, it was marvelous. You think I could live with this, and then it just became too much. So I'd have to say no to the autograph after that.
Brilliant. Thank you, sir. All the best. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Pleasure, Bruce. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks. I love it. I love a storyteller, and he's bang on. The experience is what you remember. He's made connections all over the world, and he's made every team that he's had better. The proof is absolutely there. I can't wait to see Germany in the Paris Olympics. I think they'll be the team to watch. I've loved it. I hope you've enjoyed it too. You can catch us on Apple, Acast, and Spotify. You can watch us on YouTube and Facebook. If you've liked it, tell us about it. Leave us a review, subscribe, and tell your friends. But for now, my name is Bruce Aitchison from the Happiness Is podcast, and my happiness is egg-shaped. I look forward to seeing you all again very, very soon.